More to talk about on tonight's episode of the Matt Sager podcast than I could possibly begin to get to. Today we'll never forget. I was here in Greenwich Village, New York on September 11th of 2001 when the sky was on fire. Went to work like nothing was happening. New Yorkers get jaded that way. It's easy to forget. You get so used to anything happening at any time. You go outside and, oh, look at that. The sky's on fire. It's whatever. Gotta go to work. Especially for me. I've talked before about being a workaholic at times in my life, and this was one of them. I'd left a series of unsatisfying radio jobs for what I'd hoped was going to be a better place. Sirius satellite radio that would later become Sirius XM, where the walls were made of glass and where we had a direct view of downtown Manhattan. And so, having left just a few blocks from Ground Zero, I was now at work among friends, a couple of enemies, but mostly people who really cared about me and who I really cared about, and a few bureaucratic jackholes who I will not name, although I will refer to their actions. But from those glass walls, we saw it all. We saw the buildings fall. The thing that really killed me was seeing what really looked like a brief glimmer of hope right before one of the towers falling. And I was messed up pretty bad. It's fair to say that the PTSD never went away and that a plethora of new diseases. I've spoken earlier about how I seem to have every weird disease that nobody ever gets. I saw a doctor yesterday for something very minor, and he just asked for a bit of a primer about what's going on with me, and watching his jaw just drop increasingly to the floor as I was like, oh yes, and this interferes with that, which is so-and-so syndrome. This is not a young, inexperienced doctor. This guy had seen a lot, understood what I was saying quite well, and just couldn't take it all in. He was just baffled. And as a patient, that leaves you appreciate the honesty, yet at the same time, it's not a compliment. And so it's hard not to talk about that, just as it's hard not to talk about the fact that this is the birthday of someone I've just lost. Yes, things are not somber enough. I've just lost someone in my life who meant an enormous amount to me, whose birthday was September 11th. But I don't want this to be the most somber episode of the Matt Sager podcast ever. The only thing I'll say is that among my coworkers were people who really worked extremely hard to get me through it, and vice versa. I don't think there'd ever been more of a familial kind of tie with me and my coworkers and friends as there was at that time. But I also remember September 12th and being called into an emergency meeting, again, by executives I won't name. But it was an emergency meeting, which made a lot of sense. This was an urgent time. We'd just seen the greatest disaster any of us had ever seen and likely, hopefully, ever will see. And so, for the first time, thoughts of, emergency egress from the McGraw-Hill building where we were working, that might be a topic of discussion, as might be how to handle mail. You may recall every package at that time. People thought it was going to be anthrax or something else terrible. This meeting was to discuss, and I'd like you to keep in mind that the satellites hadn't successfully launched. We were doing daily shows for ourselves, but the service didn't exist yet. We were selling radios that didn't work. No one was able to hear our service. So, given that many of us were suffering from PTSD, some of us were unaccounted for. We were all different degrees of damage. There could be many reasons for this meeting. The reason that we actually were called to meet, however, was to pull music from this service that, again, did not exist. So let's see. Might as well jump. Gotta get rid of that. Because, Wheel in the Sky. There was the sky. U2's Beautiful Day, at the time a new single, because it was a beautiful day on Tuesday, September the 11th. It was an incredibly, probably the most beautiful day of the year. Plus, it used the word Bedouin, which is vaguely Middle Eastern, so gotta yank that. Free Fallin', again, it was disgusting. Not being a religious man. It's the only time in my life that I said, how do the people in this room not recognize that we're surrounded by demons? That the people speaking have no souls? Never got over that, just as I never got over a lot of that day. But the city's still standing. You and I are still standing. That's a reason to not despair, but to celebrate and be triumphant and love each other and celebrate that love. Not take each other for granted. Not take our safety for granted. Not take our democracy for granted or anything else. My God, did I not want to be somber today. but it's seemingly impossible. Plus, I thought about maybe mentioning something that happened with me on social media with a friend of mine today, but I'm going to have to do an episode later this week about social media censorship and lack thereof and how it's left us in an impossible position. That just as Google and YouTube and Facebook and every podcast provider gave a free voice to every crackpot conspiracy theorist, racist a-hole for the last decade or more, to the point where they finally said, oh my God, we've got to, all right, having given them unfettered access, we now have to deplatform them completely. And if anyone even mentions them or mentions anything they've talked about, we got to censor that too. Now that's problematic because the toxins are already in the air. Every awful conspiracy theory ever uttered is still in the minds and hearts and souls of the people who were exposed to it. But now if you want to talk about it and refute it and celebrate the fact that they're gone, if I were to get into specifics, YouTube would yank my video. I'd be deplatformed. Algorithms are searching for keywords that, again, having propagated this toxic message themselves. Now, if you utter anything to do with this message, even, especially in many cases, refuting and celebrating the end of this message, you'll be demonetized. Twitter being a noteworthy exception. They were going to let Alex Jones stay on Twitter until Alex Jones literally harassed the chief executive officer in person. You gotta let me face my accusers. You gotta, come on, talk to me, Jack. Twitter was fine with him, but he just had to martyr himself on the altar of idiocy. And that was the only thing that would ever get rid of him. And similarly, today, I received a direct message that if I tell you what it contained, YouTube won't air this clip. It was horrifying. It was a direct threat to my life with photographs to accompany it. And I reached out to Twitter and said, whew, look at this. They said, well, which of the three tweets would you like to? I said, all three. The one with this armament, the one with that armament, and the one that you've got to have a military license to carry. I'd like to report those tweets. 90 seconds later, they said, we've done a thorough investigation and concluded that everything's fine. If you've got any further questions, write back. So I wrote back, I've got a couple questions. How in 90 seconds did you look at those weapons in that threat to me and conclude that everything was fine? And they said, well, we just did. Please don't respond because the case is closed. So on the one hand, you've got a literal Wild West where the only way in which you can be harmed on Twitter, you can be as hateful as you want. I'll grant you, they're making the absurd gesture of removing the occasional blue check. Like, you're no longer verified. You still have an open megaphone that we're providing you to spread as much hate as possible. And frankly, you're crazy. Your followers are crazy. Removing your blue check only gives you more credibility in their eyes as being shut down by us liberals. But by all means, have at it with the violence, with the threats, with the conspiracy, and everything else. And then you've got every other social media platform where you can't talk about it at all. We need to find some sane common ground. Twitter needs to police their lunatic a-holes running wild. And yes, I believe that Jack is a right-wing crackpot, and he will fight to the death. Again, this stops short of him being harassed in person. That's when his morals will show themselves. Quite suddenly and quite abruptly. But other than that, Twitter is going to be the home of hate speech from now on, and that's going to have a real impact on it going forward, on its viability as a social platform, and whether we continue to interact with each other there. And every other social media platform, well, algorithms are important, and getting rid of the hate speech you've propagated and given a platform to for so long is admirable, to be commended, and necessary. But it's not being done right. You're shutting out the voices of sanity. You're just ending the discussion where it ended, and where it ended was not resolved. You need to come out and say, no, we're not just not giving this guy a platform. His platform has been removed because the shit he was saying was crazy and incited people to violence. And please don't incite people to violence. But do talk about it. Talk about how it affected you. If you're a Sandy Hook parent, we're not going to censor your video for saying that Alex Jones ruined my life. So, again, that's my more somber than expected message tonight on the Matt Sager podcast. And whatever this day means to you, I wish you the very, very best. We're all stronger together, and tomorrow's going to be a happier day for us all, certainly for the show. Contact me on social media. I'd love to have you on as a guest, co-host, what have you. matt@mattsager.com is my email, or call 646-535-4788. Leave me a voicemail, and I'll be happy to get back in touch with you. On Twitter, good old Twitter, @Matt Sager. Facebook, The Matt Sager. My voiceover page is Matt Sager VO, and the podcast page is Matt Sager Podcast. Instagram's Real Matt Sager, and for more social links, articles, blog posts, my voiceover reels, contact info, and much more, go to mattsagervoiceover.com.